6 years in a small cell, and he has got a story to tell. And I hope that you will be inspired and put yourself in that cell with him, because I can't imagine a worse hell, in my opinion. He has a book that he wrote called I Am No Hero. It's a really great depiction of his experience there and his story there. He was in there with John McCain at the time. That was one of his prison mates. And what he took from that experience is something that I think you'll all be inspired by. So I'm going to let a video play and then welcome Captain Charlie Plumb.
Come on. The prison cell I was in Vietnam was 8 feet long and 8 feet wide. I remember distinctly the dimensions of that little cell. I could pace 3 steps in one direction before I ran to a wall. Then I had the opportunity of turning around and pacing 3 steps the other way. Inside my new little cell, I had nothing to do. I had no books to read, no window to look out, no TV, telephone, didn't have a pencil or a piece of paper. For 2,103 days. (2,103 days equates to age 24 to age 30 in my life. Turn your calendar ahead to the year 2029. Consider between today and 2029 the things that will happen in your life. The books you'll read, TV you'll watch, kids you'll raise, deals you'll do, pretty good chunk out of a guy's life. Now, I'd been a very active person, on the go all the time, searching for an extra 15 minutes a week to call my mom. Suddenly I had 24 hours a day for the next nearly 6 years. I'm describing this scenario to you somewhat semi-dramatically because I think the most value I can be to you, professionally and personally, whether you come here as an AE or a broker, whether you're from Portland, Oregon, or Portland, Maine, whether your goal in life, your main goal in life is to change the world or to change a diaper. The most value I can be in the few minutes we're together is to invite you into my little prison cell. You see, there's a great deal to be learned in adversity. So for the next few moments, I'd like for you to try your best to smell the stench of that imaginary 2-gallon bucket in the corner I call my toilet. I'd like you to try to feel the baking heat of a tropical summer in a tin-roof prison cell 10,000 miles away from the good life. I'd like you to try to taste the salt, the annoying taste of salt in the corners of your mouth from the sweat and the tears and the blood. Not that you'll ever be prisoners of war, God forbid. But if I do my job this morning, you'll see where the biggest challenges you face in the mortgage business, with the kids, at home. The biggest challenges you face in life are the very challenges that I faced over there in that prison cell. And more importantly, your response to the challenges you face, if you're going to succeed in this business and in life, have to be the same recipe of responses I used over there just to survive. I know there's some skepticism here. Wait a minute, Captain. You know, you're talking about something a long way geographically. You're talking about something a long way from my business, and yet, ever been lonely? Ever felt that your support group wasn't very supportive? Ever felt that you had trouble communicating, even with those you love the most? Ever been restricted, by your surroundings? Ever had your very baseline value system challenged? Ever have the fear of tomorrow or next week or next month? See, those are all the same challenges I had in the prison cell. Day after day after day. I didn't know what was going to happen tomorrow. You know, I wasn't worried about the interest rates, but I'll tell you this. And I didn't have very many quickies while I was there. But if you will accept the fact that the challenges you're facing today are similar to the challenges that I faced over there, then we'll talk about the advantage of adversity. Well, I'll tell you this. First thing to learn in a prison cell is pain. This hurts. This hurts a lot. Second thing, you might not suspect this is, well, the minutes eventually wear into hours. It takes forever for the hours to wear into days, and days into weeks, weeks into months. You acclimate. You learn how to breathe deeply and think about things far away, sunny beaches, warm breezes, and thoughts of home. And you know what happens? You get used to this. You really do. In fact, you get so comfortable in your little 8-foot by 8-foot cell that the last place you want to go is outside the cell because it's dark and lonely out here. At least you know the devil in the light. Here's what happens. You get this restriction built up. And it's not the 8 feet between the walls. It's 8 inches between your ears. You're in a mental box. Ever get in one of those mental boxes? We all get in our mental boxes. I am convinced the mental boxes, that 8 inches between your ears can be more restrictive than the 8 feet between the walls of my prison cell. So how do you overcome this? Well, from the very beginning, I thought, you got to stay active. You got to keep your mind going. Make up some little game to me. I thought, that's what I'll do. I'll make a little deck of cards. And I did. I constructed a little deck of playing cards about the size of postage stamps. I tore these cards from 52 little strips of toilet paper. And I can tell you this with authority. Toilet paper is tough to shuffle. Seriously, you don't lick your fingers very much shuffling toilet paper. Before I get into the connection, between my life story and your own, let me tell you what I think of Glenn and Mindy. We go back quite a ways. We have sailed together, we have flown together, we have ridden horses together, and I know them pretty well. I know their kids pretty well. Our families have gotten together on several occasions. And I got to tell you from my experience, I've made over 5,000 speeches in every state in 24 foreign countries. I've met a lot of people. I have spoken to about every industry you can name. I don't think there's anybody I admire more than Glenn and Mindy Stearns. If you don't know them, read Integrity. Check out the Undercover Billionaire. They show the true heart of these two people. And that's what this company is all about. As you know the history, that they sold Stearns Lending and then it went down. And the big reason, I think the big reason that it was missing, okay, is that the personal touch, okay? The giving, the loving, the sharing, the packing parachutes. Let me explain that. Several years after I came home from Vietnam, I was in a restaurant in Kansas City where I used to live. About 2 tables over, a guy kept looking at me, and I caught his eye, but I didn't recognize this gent. He stood up. The guy walked over to my table. He pointed at me with kind of a serious look on his face. "You're Captain Plumb?" I looked up and I said, "Yes, sir. I'm Captain Plumb." "You're that guy. You flew jet fighters in Vietnam. You're a fighter pilot. Part of that Top Gun outfit in Miramar, California. You were shot down, you parachuted in enemy hands, and you were tortured, and you spent 6 years as a prisoner of war." Somewhat dumbfounded, I looked up at this guy and I said, "How in the world did you know all that?" He finally broke into a smile and he said, "Because I packed your parachute." Yeah. I was dumbfounded. Best I could do was stagger to my feet, reach out a very grateful hand of thanks. He came up with just the proper words. The guy grabbed my hand, he pumped my arm, and he said, "I guess it worked." I said, "Yes, sir, indeed it did." And I must tell you, I've said a lot of prayers of thanks for your nimble fingers, but I had no idea I'd ever have the opportunity of expressing my gratitude in person. He said, "Were all the panels there?" I said, "I must be honest with you, they weren't. Of the 18 panels I was supposed to have in that parachute, had only 15 good ones. 3 of the panels were torn, but it wasn't your fault, it was mine. I ejected from that F-4 Phantom jet at 600 miles an hour, close to the ground. I was well outside the envelope of that parachute. You did your job, I didn't do mine." I said, "But let me ask you a question. Do you keep track of all the parachutes you pack? Do you know of all the lives you've saved?" The guy said, "No." Now, this is the most important part of the conversation at night. Maybe the most important thing I say this morning. I think it deals directly with what Glenn and Mindy and kind lending is all about. Here's what he said. "No," he said, I don't keep track of all the parachutes I pack. It's enough gratification for me just to know that I've served, just to know that I've helped somebody out along life's rocky road." Here's a sailor, well below the waterline of this aircraft carrier. He stands at a long wooden table. Here's his job. Weaving the shrouds and folding the silk panels of these parachutes, pass them along 1 after 8, 10, 12 hours a day while the jet jockey, while the Top Gun zooms around the sky at the speed of sound, couldn't have cared less about the guy down there in the hole. Until one day my parachute came on, and he packed mine up for me. Well, we had a long conversation that night, this parachute packer and me. His point was this: I only packed your physical parachute. Your survival and even thriving through that experience depended on a lot of other parachute packers. Your mom, your dad, they gave you the discipline and the forgiveness. The coaches, the preachers, the teachers, they're the ones that packed your mental, your psychological, your spiritual parachute. They're the ones that really allowed you to survive. So I guess the question becomes, how's your parachute packed? Do you have what it takes? And who packed your parachute? And have you thanked them lately? Next question is, how's your parachute packing coming along? Who looks to you for strength in time of need? You know, obviously, home buyers, clients, brokers, children, each other. That's what this is all about. That's what this community is all about, is service, is serving other people. You heard it from Manny, you've heard it from Glenn, you've heard it from Mindy. That's what this is all about. So, my parachute was pretty well packed. My physical parachute, 15 and 18, my spiritual parachute, my emotional parachute, I was pretty well prepared for going into that battle. Early in life, mom, dad, big sister, 2 little brothers, a coach who took me after a terrible game, and the last game he'd ever coached, as a matter of fact. This is grade school basketball, all right? And he takes me after the game that we lost again, and he's walking behind. This guy was a veteran. He had shrapnel in his leg from his war. He walked with a limp. I walked faster, but he caught up with me. I felt his arm over my sweaty shoulder. I looked at the coach. I said, "I'm sorry, Coach. I guess this team's just a bunch of losers." Coach squeezed my shoulder. He sunk his fingernails into the flesh. He was about to say something he didn't want me to forget. He said, "Son, whether you think you're a loser or whether you think you're a winner, you're right." I didn't understand what that meant. I asked him, "Coach, what did that mean?" He said, "Just this." He said, "Life is a choice. Every day of your life is going to be a beautiful choice. I don't care where you go," he said. "I don't care what kind of a scrape you get yourself into." I don't know how he had that kind of premonition. Unless it was the way I played basketball. He said, "You can choose every day. You can choose happiness or sadness every day. You can choose a smile or a frown. You can choose health or sickness. You can choose life or death." He said, "There's one more choice. When the going is tough and the margins are thin and the interest rates are high and the inventory is low and you're out of ideas and you want to quit, you can always choose to give away all those other choices. You can always choose to step back and become the victim, or you can step forward and become the victor. It's your choice." Now, it's true. With that kind of inspiration and motivation, as you might suspect, I graduated from that little grade school top of my class of 2. And the other guy wasn't all that bright. I don't know how smart you were at age 17. I'd never seen the ocean. I'd never ridden in an airplane. I'd never been out of the 4 states of Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, Missouri. I knew I needed an education. I started looking for scholarships. My parents couldn't afford to send me to college. Got an appointment to Annapolis, the Naval Academy. Had no idea what they did at Annapolis. But I got on that Greyhound bus, and 2 days later, as some of you in this room have done, I was pledging to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. What a commitment that was. I had no idea what it was going to take to fulfill that commitment. Learned a lot there, but I got my parachute packed too. Chaplains and officers and other midshipmen and the superintendent would stand up in front of the big pep rallies before the football games. The guy would clench his fists. You could see the veins running his brow. He would say, "You guys can do anything you set your minds to do." Hype? Messing with our minds? Mental manipulation? Did it work? Those 4 years, the Naval Academy took a ragtag football team and produced 2 Heisman Trophy winners, Roger Staubach, Joe Bellino. We were the number one college team in the nation for a while. Best of all, Navy beat Army 4 times straight. So that guy's right. Interesting stories there, Captain. What's that got to do with the mortgage business anyway? What's the point here? I was empowered by both those guys. Both the coach and the superintendent empowered me. They empowered me to win, which was beautiful, but more importantly, they empowered me to fail. Did you get that part? Life is a choice. Said the coach, you can do anything you set. Those are positive. You can take those either way. They empowered me to win. They empowered me to fail. Most important of all, they empowered me to make my choice between the two. And so it is in the mortgage business. Look what you've got. Look at the opportunity, okay? Look at the people that need your help. You are empowered in every way to win. More importantly, gang, you're empowered to fail. Didn't want to hear that. Wait a minute, you're supposed to be a motivational speaker, huh? I think that's one of the big problems we have in our country today. We don't let our kids fail. It's tough for a parent, you know? It's tough. So I graduated from Annapolis. From that school, I didn't graduate top of my class. In fact, my claim to fame was I graduated in the half of the class that made the top half possible. Threw that hat in the air, married my high school sweetheart, a lovely blonde girl from Kansas, under the Arch of Swords. It was a military wedding, picture perfect, flight training, Pensacola, Florida, Beeville, Texas, Meridian, Mississippi, where John McCain was my flight instructor. John taught me to fly jets. I was going to see him later on in the war, in that prison camp. Out to San Diego, where I flew the first adversarial flights for the Top Gun school. Exciting times in my life. Wow. Have you seen Top Gun, Maverick? Good, yeah. It was about a month before I saw the second Top Gun. And I got a call from one of my fighter pilots, but hey, have you seen Top Gun Maverick? I said, no, I haven't seen it yet. Well, I've seen it, and I think you're going to cry, Charlie. My son called up and said, hey, Dad, have you seen Top Gun Maverick? I said, no, Joe. He said, I've seen it. You'll probably have an erection. My wife said, probably at the same time. I launched on the aircraft carrier Kitty Hawk, a floating city. You saw the video. Floating city. If you haven't been aboard an aircraft carrier, put that on your bucket list. It's amazing, amazing machine. 74 successful combat missions in Vietnam, 5 days from the end of my tour. 5 days from going home to my wife and friends and a little R&R, and my co-pilot in my back seat and I were hit by a surface-to-air missile. It exploded with some 12,000 pounds of jet fuel, sent that bird topsy-turvy end over end down towards the rice paddy below. I ejected, he ejected, our parachutes opened, and we came floating down over enemy territory. Ever been in one of those parachutes? I don't mean the nylon ones, I'm talking about the parachutes of life. See, that's what this whole discussion is about. The challenges that you and I face in life, okay? The point in my, hypothetically, okay, here's the metaphor. When you're looking up at the past, all right, this is the parachute that's been packed for you, all right? And you're looking down at the unknown. I mean, we've had some pretty good times, haven't we, you know, in the last decade, all right? You know, 2.25% interest rates. I mean, people throwing money at us at the time. And you're looking down at the unknown. This is tomorrow, okay? This is what the Fed's going to do with the interest rates, okay? Got the picture? How do you handle that? I mean, seriously, do you approach that with fear? Do you back up and play the victim? Or do you step forward and be the victor? So there I was. I don't know what you do. I'll tell you what I did. Felt the opening shock of the parachute. I looked up at the canopy, okay, the panels that had been packed for me. I counted the panels. That's called assessing your support group. I looked down at the unknown. They're shooting at me. The audacity, don't they know I'm the Top Gun? Haven't they read the press? Look, they just knocked down my multi-gazillion-dollar airplane, and now they're shooting at the pilot. And I'll tell you this, you can identify with this one. When you're dodging bullets, it's tough to come up with a long-range plan. I'm sorry, I keep thinking about dodging bullets, and my mind immediately goes to Glenn Stearns. Read that book. He dodged a few bullets, and he's still here. Amazing. So what do you do? Well, I took a deep breath, tried to calm myself, let about half of my breath out, and I bowed my head, and I said a prayer. I asked for a little extra strength that day from above. I'll never forget that prayer. I thought about that prayer a lot in those little prison cells that I was in. I thought back to that moment in time, and I'm hanging in a parachute, and I would say to myself over and over the years, dummy, why didn't you make a deal with God? Promise to be a righteous, godly, sober guy the rest of my life, Lord. All I need from you is a little wind. 10, 12 knots, gusting to 40, please. I guess I didn't feel much of a negotiable position, so I just prayed for the guts it was going to take to survive. I knew there was going to be some pain waiting for me on the ground, and I prayed that there might be some value in the pain. And then I prayed for my wife. Remember her? See, this was my war, not hers, and yet at the end of the Vietnam War, she would feel more pain from that war than I did. Seriously. It's tough on families, you know. It really is tough on families. So, about that time, I hit the ground, sunk about waist deep in a rice paddy, descended upon by, it seemed like 1,000 of the enemy, immediately stripped me of everything I had. Took my flight gear, my clothing, my personal possessions. They even took my name. They gave me a name from their language just to humiliate me for the next nearly 6 years. Dragged me around village to village, camp to camp, finally into Hanoi, the capital city, where I was tortured for 2 days, ropes and irons and whips. And that's when they tossed me into this little cell. The one I described to you from the very beginning. Wasn't kidding you an inch. Let me tell you about my physical state. Those first few months. I was bleeding from 4 open wounds, no medical care. I was getting pretty thin. I figure I was down to 120 pounds or so, surviving on 2 bowls of rice a day and a little broth maybe. I had developed all these boils. We never really knew where they came from, but every American taken prisoner, and especially in the summertime, developed all these boils, so many boils in my body. I am literally rotting away in a communist prison camp. That's my physical state. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the good news. The bad news was my mental state. I'd given up. I had surrendered. Fighter pilots are not supposed to surrender. That's not in the Top Gun playbook. In the military, you're taught, if you're a prisoner of war, you're only obligated to give name, rank, serial number, date of birth. Those 4 items, all you have to give the enemy. And I flew the skies of Vietnam thinking I'm tough enough, I'm big enough, I'm strong enough. I'll never give more than name, rank, serial number, date of birth. The pain was too great. And I felt very guilty about that. I thought, wait a minute, I so failed in my mission. How can I ever go home if this war ever ends? Maybe I won't. Maybe I'll just change my name and go to some foreign country because I don't want my wife, I don't want my family, I don't want my fellow fighter pilots to know how weak I was and how miserably I'd failed. And with that mindset, okay, of guilt, all right, of shame, all right, I'm pacing along, and I heard in the far corner the chirping noise of a cricket. Now, I'd been a farm kid, knew what a cricket sounded like, but the longer I listened, the more rhythmic this sound became. I walked over to check it out. I found in the corner of my prison cell no cricket, but a little piece of wire. It was about that long, poked through a hole at the base of the cell wall and scratching on my concrete floor, making this chirping noise like a cricket. Are you with me? Can you imagine what might be going through your mind in a situation like this? With this mindset of guilt and frustration and shame. I'm watching a little wire. I'm thinking, the enemy is not sophisticated enough to try to trick me. It's not the enemy on the other end of that wire. It's got to be an American, another prisoner of war. If it's another prisoner of war, it also has to be a fighter pilot. This is an air war over North Vietnam, and it's fighter pilots are being shot down and captured. I know the whole prison camp is full of pilots. Boy, would I like to talk to another pilot. We could tell some stories. But I bet that guy's tougher than I am. I bet he's older. I'm 24. He's got to be more mature. He's got to be a better pilot. And he probably didn't spill his guts when they tortured him. I think I'm not interested. Ever get that way? You know? The borrower that wasn't too happy with our last communication. The spouse that doesn't want to talk about that unspeakable topic. And you don't want to mess with it, because if I can just crawl over in the corner of this prison cell and wait, surely in a few years the Marines will break down the gates and I'll be set free. I'll never have to take another risk the rest of my life. Oh, there's an interesting word, R-I-S-K, risk. Something we talk about a lot in the mortgage business, you know? I mean, we have ways to measure risk tolerance, you know? We have ways to avoid risk. And I think for the most part, most of us don't want to risk. And yet, I'm suggesting to you that if you're going to be all you can be, if you're going to make it through this downturn, you got to take some risks. You got to get further outside yourself. You got to kick down what's left of your comfort zone and go tug on a wire. This is not easily done. I sweated bullets for a couple of hours. Finally tugged on that wire, and the wire tugged back. I tugged again. It disappeared, right back through that rat hole. The wire came back about an hour later. This time it had a little note wrapped around the end of the wire. The note was written on a dirty piece of toilet paper, just blobs on this wadded up piece of toilet paper. I could barely make it out, but it said, memorize this code, then eat this note. I did it. I memorized the code. I ate the note. The code is a 5x5 box of the alphabet. 5 lines, 5 rows. A, B, C, D, E across the top, F, G, H, I, J, second line. Numbers down the side, across the top, indicating any letter would be represented by 2 numbers. Number of the line, then the number of the row. Got it? A, first line, first row. 1 tug, 1 more tug. Z, 5th line. You think your email is cumbersome. you try this. But it worked. This silly, archaic, cumbersome code became our language. More than that, it became our lifeblood. It was absolutely vital. I mean, life and death vital that we communicate with our fellow prisoners of war. To the point that if a guy was put in the far corner of the prison camp and couldn't communicate with the rest of us, he probably wasn't going to make it. In this day and age, you and I would probably argue the greatest achievement of all time is that we can now pass a packet of data from one handheld machine around the world to another handheld machine at lightning speed. I'm still here to suggest to you that the very essence of life, the reason you're on this globe, okay, is to validate other people. Because in those prison cells, if it was dark, and it was in a lot of the camps, and you were alone, some guys were in solitary confinement for 4.5 years, you lose track. You wouldn't know what's a real memory, what's a hallucination. You need a baseline. You need to validate your sanity. You need somebody to tell you you're okay. Sometimes you wondered even if you're alive or dead. The simple tugging on a wire, to have that wire tugged back, meant 2 things. Number 1, somebody's responding to something I'm doing physically, thus I exist. Number 2, somebody cares. How does that equate in your life? See, I think that's the first thing you have to establish is validating other people. You gotta fall in love with these folks, you know? You gotta find out who they are and what their joys are, what their concerns are, and appeal to that. That's where it all begins. So on the other end of the wire, Lieutenant Commander Bob Shoemaker, fighter pilot extraordinaire, astronaut candidate. Better than that, here's a parachute packer. He said, how you doing, buddy? I said, I'm doing terrible, buddy. I said, my president sent me over here. It's his dirty Vietnam War, not mine. And the enemy's not playing fair. They're torturing prisoners. They signed the Geneva Convention, not abiding by it. And it's not my private airplane I flew in here. Congress bought that airplane. They should be here. I should not. Whole thing is not fair what's going on in my life, but it's not my fault. I'm the victim of circumstances beyond my control. Can you identify with this? Whole thing is not fair what's going on in this business, man. Interest rates are so high, I can't get anybody, and the inventory is so low, I can't even find any houses to make loans on, and it's not fair. And then the regulations. I can't state the regulations, but it's not my fault. I'm the victim of circumstance. Shoemaker said, you want to know your biggest problem? I said, you mean I have problems bigger than the ones I can see? He said, sounds like you're suffering from a fairly common prison disease. A lot of guys die from it. Well, what's the name of this disease? He said, well, around here we just call it prison thinking. I said, prison thinking? He said, Roger, you think you're a prisoner. I stepped away from the hole in the wall. A little self-analysis. Those 4 open wounds, still got them. I'm still bleeding, okay? This is months later. No medical care, all right? Those boils, I have so many boils on my front side I can't count them all. So many on my face I can't see through them. I am riding, my sole possession in life is a rag. I have knotted around my waist to hide my nudity. Clearly I am rotting away in a communist prison camp, and now, to add insult to injury, they put me next to a positive thinker. I kept tugging. Okay, tell me about this prison thinking stuff. Don't you see when a fighter pilot is first blown out of the sky, or AE or broker approaches one more challenge you weren't expecting? What's the first emotion? Oh God, why me? This is so terrible. What could be worse than this? This event will never have any value. In fact, the best this time can ever be is a period of my life I can someday forget. Shoemaker said, so you have to look for some advantage in this adversity. He said, because the truth is, adversity is a horrible thing to waste. So what's the advantage in the adversity that we're facing? What's the good news going on out there? Because there's a lot of good news. You guys and gals know this is cyclical. This is going to turn around, and when it does, look out, kind lending. Man, you guys are positioned to take on the world. It's amazing what's going on here. Okay, so Shoemaker said, you'll find, Charlie, that you've just joined the best team you'll ever play on. You will find the leadership, the American officers in this prison camp, the leadership we have here today, the finest leaders you will ever see, bar none. Our leaders can't see us. They can't talk to us. They can't email us. They can't text us. They can't fire us. They can't give us a vacation. And yet, they're the best leaders you'll ever see because they're setting the example. They're validating each of us. They've given us a motto. It's really easy. It's 3 words. Here's the motto: return with honor. Well, it really worked. Here's a statistic you might be interested in. About 6 or 8 years ago, a study was done of all the Vietnam veterans, all right? Nearly a third, 30.6% have PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. You know what it is. Of the prisoners of war, 4% have PTSD. And it's primarily the guys shot down near the end of the war. They were not tortured. They were only in prison for a few weeks or a month or two. They're the ones that have the problems. Figure that out. Well, the folks that know a lot more about this than I, the psychologists and psychiatrists, believe it's because of the leadership that we had in the prison camp. The folks that gave us the vision, that gave us the purpose in life, are the ones that really made that happen. So we're a pretty proud group, as a matter of fact. 591 men came home from the prison camps in Vietnam, 591. They thought we'd be in baskets. They thought we'd be vegetables. They had our families briefed to institutionalize us the rest of our lives. So far, from 591 men, we have produced 17 generals and 7 admirals, most of us retired as senior grade military officers. 90% of the Vietnam POWs stayed in the military. We can... We came back to fly jets, as I did, to command aircraft carriers and fleets across the world. We have CEOs, we have doctors, lawyers, preachers, teachers, bishops, judges. We have 2 ambassadors from our number. We have a governor from our number. We have 2 United States senators, a bunch of congressmen, a vice presidential candidate, and a presidential candidate from 591 men. Now, how's that for validating what Shoemaker taught me, that adversity is a horrible thing to waste? You wasting your adversity? Are you blaming other people or other things for the challenge that you face? See, that's kind of the whole point here. Well, the leadership certainly didn't come from all the senior guys. Maybe the best parachute packer in the place turned out to be a Navy sailor, an enlisted guy. We were all officers. We were college graduates. We were fighter pilots. Who shows up? A Navy sailor. How did a Navy sailor get into a prison camp in an air war over North Vietnam? Well, he fell off his ship. He used to tell us, I wasn't captured, I was rescued. Indeed he was. Seaman Douglas Hagdell from Clark, South Dakota, was on the fantail of a cruiser, Canberra, in the middle of the night. Ship burps, he falls off, okay? Could he take a joke? We would tug on our wires and tap on walls in our secret code and pass around a little questionnaire, just for something to do, okay? Who's the oldest in the prison camp? Who's got the most kids back home? Who's been here the longest? One time we had what we call the high-fast, low-slow contest to try to determine what fighter pilot had jumped out of his jet going highest and fastest and who jumped out going lowest and slowest. Well, high-fast contest was won by some Air Force jock who claimed he punched out of his F-105 at 52,000 feet, 1,000 miles an hour. And the low-slow contest was won by the Navy sailor. 12 feet at 15 knots. Oh, but here's the interesting part, and why I take your valuable time to tell you his story. This insignificant, entry-level, new hire, part-timer, you know what I'm talking about, right? Didn't seem to suffer from this 8-inch box. He didn't have a bad case of this prison thinking stuff, right? So what did the sailor do? He set to work, he got into action, he made something happen, he decided as bad as this looks, there's got to be some value here. He started tugging on wires and tapping on walls and memorizing all of our names. 254 men in that prison camp. He put our names in his songs. He would sing these songs over and over and over. Look him up, Doug Hegdell, great guy. But he wasn't nearly finished. Went back through the list and memorized our social security numbers or identifier. 254 long. I mean, he's spending 6 or 8 or 10 hours a day on the lists that he's putting together. Then he went back through and he memorized our hometowns all across the country, our next of kin, and finally, I'm not kidding you, Doug Hegdell memorized the telephone numbers of each of the relatives of each of the prisoners. Now that took 2 years, all right? And when you have nothing else to do, you know, I mean, this stuff really comes. You get really creative when you have nothing to do. You take these kids off the cell phones, they get creative, you know. About that time, things were improving. Our wives were back here petitioning our government and the governments around the world to stop torturing their husbands, and it worked. So they responded by, we're going to send some guys home early as proof of our lenient and humane treatment. They went to John McCain. They tried to send John McCain home early. He said, I'm not doing that. I'm not giving up on my buddies here that need American medical aid. Send them home, and then it'll be my turn. So they're still looking for someone. And our senior man sent the message to the sailor, son, I want you to go home. The sailor sent back, sir, with all due respect, I'd rather stay here with the team. Our senior man said, this is not an option. Here's a direct order. Shove off. The sailor said, aye, aye, sir. Home he came. Now write the script on the sailor. What would you expect him to do? He started to travel, went west coast to east, north to south, went through each one of the hometowns he'd memorized, dialed each one of those telephone numbers he'd memorized, spoke to each one of the wives he'd memorized, told her that her husband was alive. The war finally ended. We traded prisoners, 10,000 of them for 591 of us. And I flew out of the Vietnam on a big jet airplane and Clark Air Force Base, put these feet on free soil for the first time in nearly 6 years. Ran to the first telephone I could find to call, tell her the good news, but she had gone. Called my parents back in Kansas. What's happened to my wife? I said, well, she hung on for 5 years, and just 3 months ago, she filed for divorce. She's engaged to another guy. Talk about another gut punch, huh? Well, I'm feeling sorry for myself and blaming everybody else for my problems. And I'm saying, wait a minute, you hypocrite. Did you learn nothing in that 8-foot by 8-foot classroom? Come on, man, pull up your socks. Let's get on with life. And as I did. And the other guys did too. We're having, just a very happy, successful, meet any of the POWs from Vietnam. We all have this same attitude towards life. I ran a marathon a few years ago in Alaska. It's called the Midnight Sun Run. It's the Saturday closest to the longest day of the year. I chose that marathon because I figure I might need 24 hours of daylight to run 26 miles. Took 2 of my kids there. Joe and Evie went with me, and the night before the race. Kids, this is your dad's craziness, and I know you have no interest in this race, but it's an early go for me. I don't even know where this race is. Don't worry, I'll find it. But tomorrow, I'll be back tomorrow afternoon. You guys take it easy. Have a leisurely breakfast. Sleep in if you want. I'll be back. And so it was a hot day for Anchorage. I'm about halfway around this race, and I hit the wall. Man, I'm sweating like crazy, just barely putting one foot in front of the other. I'm thinking to myself, the most beautiful sight in the world was going to be the finish sign, but it wasn't. It was under the finish sign. Here's Joe, Evie, 2 of my kids cheering on the old man. When I finally caught my breath, I went to my kids and I said, you just don't know how much it means to your father to have you here, but how did you find the finish line? Well, Dad, we shared a cab with a couple of guys from the hotel. They knew where it was. How did they know where it was? Well, Dad, they ran the race. They came back to the hotel. They had breakfast. What's the message here? I've taken some valuable minutes of your time. I don't take that lightly. What's the message? You'll never be prisoners of war. You never need to know this stuff. I hope and pray none of you ever get into that 8-foot cage I was in. But you will get into the 8 inchers. Yep. we just can't avoid that, How do you break free from that? How do you make it through these challenges and find some advantage in this adversity? Well, I believe you have to believe, first of all, that there is value in what we're going through. That there is light at the end of this tunnel, that there is positive things about what's going on here. And then you have to tug on some wires, okay? You got to take some risks. You got to be believers. And you got to apply the faith and the courage, the mental attitude. And if you do those things, I'm convinced you can do anything you set your mind to do. Great being with you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Hello, buddy.
Thank you so much.
Turn around, Glenn. Turn around.
No.
Thank you. Captain Charlie Plumb. Thank you.